Hello all. So today I'm talking about a Dodge with the P0344 code, what it is and how you go about fixing it. So what is a Dodge P0344 code? Well, it's a camshaft position sensor A circuit intermittent. And what does this mean? Well, basically the camshaft position sensor reports back to the onboard computer the location of the camshaft as it spins. This is done for timing. And the onboard computer is seeing an error inside of this, so it's reporting this error code. And so it's going to be two main causes. It's either going to be in the wiring or it's going to be inside the sensor. And keep in mind, some vehicles, some Dodges do have two camshaft position sensors and newer ones. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not so common. Usually there'll just be one, but there can be two. So keep that in mind. But usually when you have this problem, it's either going to be a bad sensor or bad wiring. And some people will just go ahead and swap out the sensor, and if that doesn't solve the problem, then they'll come back and troubleshoot the wiring. But the wiring's not hard to troubleshoot as long as you have some basic idea what's going on with it. And most wiring harnesses are going to be 3-wire. This is the most common. Older Dodges did have 2-wire, and some newer ones can have 4-wire. So you always want to get a schematic and be sure you have a readout to know what's going on. But by far the most common is 3 wires going to the camshaft position sensor. And the way this works is it's pretty simple. Is you have a ground wire in the middle. You'll have one wire going back to the battery, which is usually 12 volts, but this can vary. It could be 8 volts. It's just a solid voltage that is coming from the battery as a source. And the third wire is going back to the onboard computer. It's going back to the PCM. And when the sensor detects a piece of metal in front of it, it'll close the circuit and it'll send 5 volts down the third wire back to the onboard computer. So when there's no metal in front of the sensor, it'll stay at 0. So a common way that mechanics will troubleshoot this is they'll take another sensor, a known good one, and they'll attach it to the wire. They'll come in from the back, they'll go from the ground to the computer wire that's going back to the computer. They'll put a piece of metal in front of the sensor and see if it changes. If it changes, it goes like 0 volts and goes to 5 volts, then you know the whole circuit's good and you know that's all good to go. If it doesn't, then you know you got a problem. You have to troubleshoot why, like you got to open or shorted wire or something along these lines. There's some YouTube videos on that if you want to sit there and check out how you can do that or different ways you can troubleshoot the wiring. One thing to keep in mind is quite commonly these are on a fuse. So if the fuse is blown, you're not going to get no power to the circuit. So you wouldn't get no voltage going from the battery to the harness. So, and especially if there's a short or something, it could be blowing that fuse. So that's something to keep in mind. Be sure to check for a fuse. Usually inside the engine compartment, up underneath the hood, there's a fuse box in there. It'll usually be in there somewhere, but it could also be up underneath the dash. Again, it just varies, depends on the Dodge, the engine type, and the year. And so basically you want to check the wiring and check for a blown fuse. So if you've done all that, then very likely you are going to have to replace this camshaft position sensor. Now these can be easy to change out. The sensor themselves is really easy to change out. They usually just have 1 or 2 bolts and a harness going to it, but sometimes other parts can be in the way. It just varies. It just depends on the year and the engine type. And so if there's nothing in the way, they're usually pretty simple to swap out. And so what do you do if you have a Dodge with the P0344 code? Well, first thing, Google where the camshaft position sensor is on your Dodge. Be aware there can be 2 in some cases. Once you locate it, look at the wiring harness and be sure the wiring's good. Check for a fuse, see if there's any blown fuse. If that all looks good, if the wiring looks good and there's no blown fuse, then go ahead and replace the sensor, and that will usually solve the problem for a Dodge with the P0344 code. And so that's basically it. I just want to do a real quick video on how you go about fixing a Dodge with the P0344 code. If you have anything to add, please comment down below. If you have any questions, ask me and I'll try to answer them. If this video helps you, please click like, please click subscribe, and have a good day.